Good morning. It's 9:02 by my watch. I'd like to call to order the Kane County Finance and Budget Special Committee meeting of Tuesday, July 30th, 9:02. We have roll call, please.
Juby,
Should be here.
Lewis, Sanchez, Surges,
Present.
Pepe,
Steppy here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Berman,
Berman's here.
Pirog. She's online.
Thank you.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning. We have a remote attendance request from Mr. Sanchez, who is home ill. Do we agree that we would have him on? All right. Moving along. We don't have any minutes to approve. Public comments?
No public.
No public, no comments. Very good. New business. Fiscal year 2025 budget. Now, we had such a good meeting, a good conversation, at least at our last meeting. I hope that we continue that today. I know we all have questions. We all have thoughts, ideas. I think we need to express them and come up with the best that we can for the committee and for the county. So I'd like you to open up with our finance director. Kathy has a little presentation, at least of our.
So what we prepared for today's meeting was at the request of the Finance Committee members from the last Finance Committee meeting was a comparison of 2023 actual to 2025 budget, as well as for the general fund by department, and then all special revenue funds. And then also we prepared a comparison of 2024 budget to 2025 budget. And I just handed you, there's an updated budget. Department changed their budget yesterday. And so I just handed out that to all the Finance Committee members. Also did an analysis. I hope everybody enjoyed looking at it, an Excel spreadsheet analysis of the entire budget, the entire proposed 2025 budget by department and then by fund. And
Kathy, the budget that you just passed out, it's comparison, you compare 2023 actual, not 2024 budget.
Oh, okay. There should be 6 pages. There should be 2 comparisons in there.
Sorry.
Sorry about that. The Excel spreadsheet shows the proposed 2025 budget for all departments, and then under each department by fund, shows their budgeted expenditures, and then shows how much of those budgeted expenditures are funded by what I'm calling dedicated revenues, meaning those revenues could only be used to fund those sorts of expenses, such as grant reimbursements is probably the easiest example. And then how much is funded by property taxes and how much is funded by fund balance for those departments that are utilizing and that have special revenue funds. And then the remaining balance is what portion of the general funds, general government revenues, and I'll define general government revenues. It's been a term here used at the county. General government revenues, meaning sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes, personal property taxes, etc. Revenues for which they are not restricted for a particular use. So the far column on that spreadsheet shows how much of that department's 2025 budget is funded by general government revenues. And I also put together And I hope you find this useful. I think it's very helpful, actually. And I also put together a couple pie charts, 2 pie charts based on that information that shows of those general government revenues. And I also included fund balance, the $29 million in fund balance that we would need to utilize in order to quote unquote balance the 2025 budget. And you could probably use different numbers, but I chose this one for today. What portion of general government revenues and fund balance is required by each office and department in order to balance their budget? So you can see that first pie chart is by office and department, and the second pie chart is by functional area. As you know, we group things into categories such as judicial, public safety, general government, etc. So with that, if there's any questions on the information.
Oh, Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kathy, with respect to your spreadsheet on the expenses, you at the very top of it, you have the 2025 budget as of July 29, 2024. Could you explain that to me?
Just as of yesterday, as of yesterday
Those are
morning.
the actual
This is what's proposed.
proposed
budget.
2025.
Yeah.
You know, the thing that I was looking for, and I've looked this over and maybe I'm missing it, but what I wanted to take a look at, and I wanted to ask you about was, I'm not so concerned with what the adopted budget is. I'm more concerned with 2024, what the actual budget is. Now, I know we're only 7 months into it, but I think, at least I've been told by a number of different departments that your department had asked for a projection for the rest of the year for 24. Do we have that anywhere in this?
It's not in any of the reports that we ran for this meeting.
You know, I would really like to see that because I think it might give us a little bit better idea of what the actual for 24 is going to be. Because the proposed versus the actual year in and year out they're always different numbers.
I can tell you from having been immersed in these numbers, the 2024 actual or the estimated that was put together by each office and department is pretty close to 2025 budget in many cases, or 2024 amended budget.
So you're saying that the 24 budget, those numbers are very close to what the 25 proposed budget is.
For what the, yes.
I guess my question is then, why does it look like we need another $29 million?
Because we started the 2025 budget with a deficit because our 2024 budget has a almost $10 million deficit. So we're starting with a $10 million
So
deficit.
you're moving that 10 million forward.
Right.
So in essence, what we need of that 29 million is 10 million that was carried over from the preceding year. Is that correct?
Right. It's always going to be that way until we have actual new revenues to balance the expenses.
Okay, you know, my other question is I've taken a look at some of the departments and quite honestly, most of the departments or many of the departments have stayed within the 2.5% to 3% request that we made of them.
On the contractual services and commodities, yes.
Payroll, no?
Payroll, we basically, I mean, the 2024 budget includes equity increases, of course, and then we have collective bargaining union increases. So we started with what are the salaries today as of, the last couple months. And then we built in for all non-union employees, we built in a 2.5% increase. And for all the union employees, we built in their actual contractual rate. We have 15 bargaining units. For all of the bargaining units that are going to have a contract that expires on November 30th, 2024, and we do have a handful of those, we just built in a minimum of 2.5%. as a placeholder.
You know,
So if you look at the original presentation that I gave last week, the biggest increase between just the 2024 budget and the 2025 budget is salaries and benefits. Really, everything else, the contractual services and commodities was, by and large, departments and offices held it within the 3%.
could we get a copy, number one, of what the actual for 2024 is as of, say, the end of July now? So that we can take a look at that compared to the proposed or the adopted, I should say, budget for 2024. And then with respect to payroll going up, I know I've checked a few of the departments out and they seem to be within line, very close to the 2.5%, 3%. But what I'm wondering is, could you also get us a list of all the labor contracts that have been approved and what that increase is going to be on those labor contracts?
Yeah, I think I sent out a chart maybe about 2 months ago to all the board members with all of the contracts and then the rates over the subsequent years, but I will certainly send that again.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, that'd be
Sure.
great. I'm sure I've got it somewhere, but I must have misplaced it. Because what I'm wondering is, what it sounds like to me is that the labor contracts necessitated most of this roughly 20 million increase, not counting the other 10 million.
It's really all the salaries because we did do all the equity increases during 2024. I mean, starting December 1st, 2024, we had all of those equity increases across the board for all of our departments.
So between the
offices.
equity increases and the labor contract renegotiations, that's the lion's share of that 20 million increase.
Plus, we are transferring money from the general fund to the capital projects fund. We did not do that in the 2024 budget. But historically, we have the capital projects fund didn't need money last year. It for 2025 in order to complete its capital plan, the plan projects, we need to transfer money. And that the general fund is the only source, I shouldn't say only, there's some small video gaming tax revenue that goes into the capital projects fund, probably less than $100,000. But the capital projects fund is funded by the general fund.
And Kathy, could you refresh me on what that amount is for the capital fund that we're going to be proposing for the 25 budget, the increase, because it
The
was 0 in
increase?
24.
So which number?
I'd like to know the number that we're proposing for the 25 budget.
I'd have to grab that and look it up. It should be in the packet, the 2020 for Fund 500 Capital Projects Fund. I don't have that number off
4
the top of
million
my
roughly?
head.
Remember.
Oh, yes, the amount to be transferred from the general fund to the capital projects fund is a little over 4 million, but the actual entire budget of the
Yeah.
capital projects fund, I'd have to look real quick. I don't have that.
Yeah,
top of
and
my
I was
head.
really looking for
Oh,
the
the 4 million.
increase, the 4 million.
Yes, it's about
Okay.
4 million. Plus we have debt service to pay, which also comes as being funded out of the general fund.
Mr. Tepe,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Want to point out that these reports show a fund balance utilization of roughly 29 million. The reports that we got earlier showed a fund balance utilization of 35 million. The $6 million difference is because of ARPA utilization for building maintenance. So in reality, our fund balance utilization, based upon where we are now, is $35 million, which is unsustainable.
yes.
Mhm.
Mr. Chairman, Bates, please.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
Could we be sent by email whatever your committee was handed out this morning?
Well, I don't think it, well, yes.
I think everything is on the website. Oh, what was handed out is the treasurer's.
I don't, No,
Are you,
it doesn't have any effect really on what we're
It's
talking about.
insignificant.
That doesn't have any effect on it, Mavis.
okay. Thank you.
We're talking about one department and,
All right.
just
Small
moving
one.
dollars around is all it is.
But the charts, did everybody get the charts?
Yeah, that was on the, it was posted on the King
Um,
County.
That was on it? Okay.
Mhm.
Those are great charts. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, what was handed out really doesn't have anything to do with our total discussion. Well, it all nets out to, $28,895, $895,103. That's what. So I guess what do we want to do to cover that $29,000,
29 million.
or 29 million, excuse me. There's a difference. What's our suggestion to cover that?
Roth, would you mind just writing us a check?
Sure, no problem. You can bounce it all the way to the bank. Mr. Chair, Tepe here. As we discussed yesterday afternoon, I prepared a presentation on my suggestions for discussion topics. And if possible, I'd like to put on that presentation.
It's very good. I think what we're looking at right now is 29 million coming out of reserves. That would be where we would get it at this point in time. So continue with your presentation.
All right. I've cut, referred to this as a financial crisis, but part of what I wanted to start off with is that, in the past 3.5 years since I've been on the board, in my mind, we've really improved a lot of things. And this is just what came to mind. This certainly isn't some comprehensive list of everything. But when you begin to look at some of many of these impact our budget. Okay, but some of the key things that we've handled that I've been involved with are listed here. So, we've made some great strides in pay equity and fairness. We really worked with the sheriff and the state's attorney to help improve safety and effectiveness here in Kane County. Okay. We purchased new voting equipment and we implemented systems to maintain our county facilities in an organized basis. Okay. But another key thing that's really impacted us is inflation. So, okay. So where we stand now is that 2024, we're going to use almost $10 million in reserves. And we're scheduled now to use $29 million in reserves for 2025 unless we enact some other logic associated with it.
Minus the 10 million that we're going to be using on 24.
I'm sorry.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, yes,
Couldn't hear you, Bill.
I think, the 29 million that we're looking at right now includes 10 million in a carryover, if I'm correct.
It's not a carryover. It's 10 million more. It's just that, when we built the 2024 budget, we were unable to have enough revenues to pay for expenses. And since expenses have gone up, we're going to need that 10 million plus more.
But those were expenses incurred in the 24 budget that are now going to be moved to the 29 budget to balance.
No, they're separate. So
that
for-
29 million is an accurate number.
yes, we need 29 million
Thank you.
in new reserve dollars. Yes.
And as I stated earlier, it's really, we should look at it as being 35 million. And what's definitely going to happen is that if we continue on the way we're going, 2026 reserves will be 40 million plus, which is a hell of a lot more than we have. So we've got, the more we can do now, the better off we'll be in the future. So the things that the board can do on its own are somewhat limited to these two major things associated with increasing revenue. Okay. One is the PTEL increase to property tax, and second is to reallocate the RTA funds. So the PTEL increase would get us about $2 million this year. I believe, and Kathy can correct me, I believe our total tax revenue from real estate tax is about 55 million.
The current extension is 58 million.
So 58 million. So the 3.4% increase on that would get us about $2 million. Okay. Second is we could reallocate the RTA tax. Now, we don't have to do an increase to gas tax in order to do that. The increase in gas tax would be done, if we did it in concert with that, would be done just to replace the funds that would be removed from KDOT. But 6.3 million is what can be transferred to the general fund by reallocating the RTA from 75% down to 50%. So the other thing, and I'll get to that at the end of this, is that I'm suggesting that we consider reducing the department budget amounts by $13,400,000, which is unbelievably drastic, but unfortunately, it's something we need to consider. So if we did that, okay, we start off with a $29 billion coming out of reserves, less the PTEL, that brings us down to 27 billion and change, less the RTA reallocation, that brings us down to 20 million. So those two things give us some relief associated with our reserves, but not enough. So unless we do something drastic in relationship to our budgets, we've got a problem. So here are my suggestions on budget reductions by department. And this is all done just based upon numbers and my looking at numbers and saying, if we're going to come up with some major points, this is what we need to look at. So we'd be taking $5 million out of the sheriff, $3 million out of the state's attorney, $2 million out of court services, and so on. So this is my list of items that would be a discussion point. And I've just done this based upon the math.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
So Vern, what were you using as the percentage to take it out of all of these places?
These were just very, very rough calculations,
Was this-
based upon the fact of if, in order to come up with it, what would come out of the budget. I don't remember the number that
Okay.
I was using.
Because what
I didn't go look at their budgets because in my opinion, it's up to us to allocate the money.
Absolutely.
Not to redo their budgets.
Absolutely, we shouldn't tell them how to do their budget, but when you look at what percentage of the general fund each of these uses, my suggestion was that we do it in a percentage that they use. So if they take 0% of the general fund budget, we shouldn't be asking them to cut any money out of their budget. Or so what I did is I went through and I looked at who takes more than 5% of the budget. And I figured out what their percentage of that is out of the general fund. And then I did the math for the 29 million that we would have to use out of reserves. Because like I will say it forever, $1 from one committee is not the same as $1 from another. So on these smaller departments, I think they're barely making it anyway. especially environmental, which needs new tires apparently on their cars. So, I have very different numbers than you do. They will like your numbers a whole lot better than my numbers because I have less people that I've applied it to. But I also think that when we present the amount of money, whatever we decide it should be, that they go back to their committee and they figure it out. And if they cannot live without that money, they need to plead their case to their committee, and then their committee decides yes or no. Because when it comes time for us to consider alternate revenue sources, if you've sat on a committee and you've said, my department needs this extra money, and you know we don't have it, and then you vote no, you're not doing your job. So I believe that we all need to get skin in the game. I think that we're doing a great start for that. But I think it's up to the departments to tell us why they need the money that they need. And if they can convince their committee, then those 7 people need to convince the 24 and, take it from there. I mean, these are draconian cuts, these are people, these are services, these are things that if they get cut, somebody might come to pay a tax bill and not have anybody there. So these are real, these are serious. And also I want everyone to look at their supplies, because our office supply, there is no way in hell we could possibly be using as many office supplies as what every single department has budgeted for. Just saying, I know that's not going to get us 29 million, but it might get us a couple million. So that's just my opinion.
We see your numbers.
I'm scared to say them aloud with the sheriff here. So like I said, I took everybody who was over 5% of the budget. So I took court services, IT, building management, state's attorney, and sheriff. I am not suggesting that these need to be the cuts. I just applied math to it. So court services would have to come up with a little over 2 million. IT, the same amount, because they take 7% of the general funds. Buildings and maintenance takes, or building management takes 11%. They'd have to come up with about 3.19 million. State's attorney's office takes 9% of the general fund. They would have to come up with 2.6. And the sheriff's office takes about 36% of the general fund. So that'd be about 10 million, almost 10.44 million. So they're huge numbers. I'm not saying we should be asking them to take that out, but we should be asking them to justify that to their committee.
Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Ms. Juby's idea could bring us to a point where it's going to be very, very hard to come to an agreement on figures for a couple of reasons. Number one, these departments, as they talk to their committees, they're going to have in their mind and heart that these are justifiable numbers. So then the committee has to decide if they're justifiable numbers. If they are, where are we?
Well, then it's, if you think that's a justifiable number and we don't have any more money, then you have to consider what the alternatives are. If you say yes, yes, yes on every expense that comes through, knowing that we're going into deficit spending for it, and then when the conversation comes up, well, this is a way we can raise revenue. If you say no, well, you said yes, yes, yes all along. So I think it forces your hand. If you truly believe we should never raise taxes, you cannot approve these budgets. You just can't, because the money just doesn't, I don't want to see what horrible havoc this is going to wreak. So I probably would vote for a tax increase because I felt it was prudent. I think we're here, but you can't ask for a tax increase until you figure out where it's going to hurt. That's all I'm saying. I'm not advocating that we make these cuts. I'm advocating that we have these conversations based on pure math. The math is, this is a percentage of the general fund you take. We have a $29 million deficit. Figure it out. And if you can only come up with $1 million, yay. But if we have to start somewhere. It's not pretty. None of us are going to be popular. I'm sure I'm getting bounced off of every Christmas card list, but we need to have the conversation.
Sturgis,
Phil, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. You know, I agree in principle with what you're saying. I have no doubt about that. The reality is some of these departments, especially in public safety, can't cut 10 million. We know that. So to suggest 10 million, that's never going to happen. You know, maybe we'll get some. I guess my bigger question is, I looked at what Mr. Tepe came up with the PTEL, the RTA. How about the motor fuel tax? What was that amount?
The motor fuel tax was
okay.
about 7 or 8 million, but the motor fuel tax does not go to us. The motor fuel tax goes to KDOT.
Yeah, and then we.
So though we would be taking money from KDOT associated with the RTA reallocation. So the motor fuel tax, can't look at it as additional revenue, unfortunately.
So, well, we could take from transportation other areas.
I'm not sure what we can take from transportation.
I think
That's
the pro-
some dedicated revenue that goes just directly to them.
the proposal last year when we did the budget was if the county raised the local motor fuel tax to the top level that it's able to do, it would generate about $7 million. And then the county could reallocate some of the RTA sales tax revenues that go to KDOT and move more of those revenues to the general fund. And in essence, if you did that, it would be a wash
Right.
for KDOT.
Yeah,
more or
it's
less.
7.15 million versus 6.3 million.
yeah.
So it's a matter of, funding KDOT properly because, they're always behind and we need money all over the place.
Mr. Blunder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I know we had talked in the past and we have gone nowhere with it, but I still feel the ultimate solution to these problems is a little bit of cut in all the areas and putting on a referendum for a sales tax increase and letting the voters decide. Now that we won't get that money for a while, but that is truly the only way we're going to be able to get to a point where we can be balanced for a number of years. So I think us not looking at the sales tax increase is never going to give us the opportunity to get balanced long term. We may be able for a year or so, but that it's very short run. We've got to look long term, and I think the county sales tax is something that would generate enough monies that for many years down the road, we would be able to balance our budget. And quite honestly, I think that is the solution to our problem. The problem is the voters decide, and if they don't approve it, which I don't think they would the first time, I said this before, we'd have to put it on the referendum probably twice before it got approved. And then we can show where we're at to the public. But this is an education process. We can't just come up with a referendum on sales tax and not have justification and education to the people of Kane County. The other thing I like about the sales tax revenue is it's shared by many. It's really a user tax, but it's not only a user tax for the residents of Kane County, but for anyone who comes into Kane County and uses our services and or facilities. So I think quite honestly, yeah, you know, we are in a position where we're going to have to cut some expenses, but I think the only way we can achieve any stability over the long term is with a sales tax revenue referendum that gets passed. And that's probably a year and a half to 2 years away. So it's something that we better start working on now and getting a program together so that we do it. And if we don't, which I think we're negligent that we have not done it so far, I think that has been a terrible thing that we have overlooked and decided not to get our numbers together, educate the public and make them aware, because right now the public has no idea. And this education process is going to take a while. So I just think it's something that, looking at what Mr. Tepe said and Ms. Juby said, they're absolutely right. If we don't have additional revenue, and even if we do get another roughly 8 million in revenue from PTEL and RTA, we're not there. We're not gonna be. So, let's quit, ignoring the 300-pound gorilla in the corner and address it.
Mr. Tepe?
Thank you. I agree with some of your points, Mr. Leonard. Okay, that yes, the sales tax referendum would really make moving forward with this county very effective. That's exactly what DuPage County did. And they have funded that county based upon that. And as a consequence, have an entirely different situation that we have. We have for years failed to do the PTEL increase. And that has been proven to be catastrophic. Regardless of whoever it was that said, look how great a job I've done for the taxpayer, what they've done is left this county in a situation where we've got a disastrous situation right now. Problem is, we can't count upon the sales tax referendum. District 301 school district just failed a levy for the second time because the electorate said, we don't want this. We don't think you're running things properly. If we relied upon the sales tax to finance us and it didn't happen, we're just out of money. So we have no choice but to do some draconian cuts associated with our budget. And this is going to be painful for everybody. And unfortunately, it's up to this committee to recommend to the board what we do. And it's a shame, but just based upon the numbers, and, Ms. Juby and I can go back and forth as to, how we come up with them. Okay. We need to come up with some fairly drastic numbers, and it's just going to be painful all around.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure what our charge is here this morning. And while I appreciate having these conversations with my contemporaries, these are the same conversations we've had now for 6 months, 2 years in some cases. I've been asked several times, boy, Cliff, you've really been quiet about this. Where's your head? Using the notion that we have too many reserves, that we have to spend those down, kind of gives us a really false sense of the ability to balance a budget. And I think we're getting lost in the notion of reducing expenses. Because that number is so big, what difference does it make? We'll pull in 10 million from here or 20 million from there. And hey, by the time we spend down those reserves, we'll have our new taxes in play and let it go from there. I'm not ignorant. I mean, we're all thinking that. We all understand that. We've all had these conversations. But the refreshing point this morning is that, I do believe that some of the folks in this room have come forward and said, listen, we do have a spending issue and we do need to curtail it. And Vern, I very much appreciate your slide talking about all the positive things we did. And I do appreciate the comment saying we've had no automatic cost of living increase. And, I get all that. That doesn't go unnoticed. But the reality is we need to come up with what we're doing. Okay. And Bill, I'm 100% in favor of, if there needs to be an increase, it needs to be on the sales tax side. Madam Chair put up, these wonderful posters in the back of the room some months ago. And quite honestly, I was offended by some of them. They're not personally, but fundamentally. I had calls from constituents in my area that went nuts. And they weren't the residents complaining about going up the cost of a cocktail, or a pitcher of beer. They were the business owners calling saying, you don't understand the delicate balance that we have right now. Whether it be an institutional investor that has, 60 apartment buildings and is out there to the tune of $30 million between interest rates and property taxes, they're doing capital calls to stay afloat. It's not like they're earning less. I went to their office. I was summoned in. You get here or else. I got there and they said, listen, we had to create a capital call where our investors had to put money in order to stay in business here in Kane County. That's not a really great situation. It goes all the way down to the small guys in my area in downtown Dundee. Some of the TIF areas, that went unassessed for several years after the quadrennials came out, people got hit. And with commercial insurance now, I don't want to say it's doubling, but it's darn close. And even the small guys are saying, I have to increase rents. And no offense, but the smaller tenants, the beauty salons and stuff like that are saying, we just can't absorb that. We truly, we will be out of business. We will go back to cutting hair in our basements. And when I hear that, it doesn't make me feel very good as a legislator. And so I don't want to sit here silently and say, well, we can do this and do that, and we'll adjust this a little bit, and then we'll pick it up in property taxes. The property taxes on the commercial side, we can't do it. I understand that there's the notion of the sacred cow for agriculture. I understand that nobody wants to burden the individual property owner, mom and dad, because that's where the votes come from. But the backbone of what we do is based on our businesses. And the money that's brought in, when we go downtown Main Street, Aurora, Main Street, Elgin, Main Street, Carpentersville, go through the Dundees, St. Charles, that's where the big money is brought in. And we are really pushing it to the point where, I don't think we can continue to go to the well. So I'm hoping that by the time we leave here in 15, 20 minutes, we're able to say, this is what we're giving Kathy Hopkinson directions to do. This is what we want to see from either the departments and or the committees, that we are very assured of the way we're going to do this. I think we've had more than enough conversation. I think that we've, proverbial beat the horse to death. It's time to make a decision and stand on it and move forward. And I'm very much hoping that we're there right now.
Your suggestion is?
My suggestion is I'm with Ms. Juby in terms of I don't believe that across the board cut of a certain percentage works for every department. I think that there's a threshold there that, a department of 4 people or 5 people, how are you going to make an 11% cut on that when you're going to tell somebody you can't work 35 hours, you only have to work 22 hours? I don't, I think there needs to be a threshold there. And then, of the larger departments, I think that's where the cuts need to be evaluated. So I am in favor of that, but I am very much in favor of saying we need to be transparent enough in this education process to say, if we have to go to an increase somewhere, it needs to be via referendum. And it needs to, and again, I have said this to Madam Chair, Dale, I think I've said it to you. If we're going to do this, you're going to have one shot at it. I think you better make that sales tax amount big enough to continue Kane County's operations the way the residents want it to be. And you leave it up to them to say, And again, I'm not suggesting scare tactics, but if we don't have this, this is what cuts will need to happen. If we do have it, this is what betterments we can make. And then whether it's a 1/4%, a 0.5%, 1%, that's where the transparency needs to come. And we as a committee should be focusing and pivoting 100% toward that education right now today, if we want this within the next 2.5, 3 years. And Bill, I don't have enough experience or knowledge base to say it's going to take a referendum or two to get this done. But if we don't, but I do know that the Forest Preserve doing theirs this year and the notion of us trying to do it at the same time spells disaster for both. I was very supportive of the Forest Preserve's effort. I will be equally supportive of this one, only if we see a reduction in spending. I will be very forward in moving with the sales tax option. Thank you.
So Leonard,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Surges, with respect to the sales tax referendum, we can't do it this November. So the Forest
We missed
Reserve
it, yeah.
referendum, yes, will be this November. But I've been involved in referendums before, and they usually take at least 2 votes before
Cycles.
the sense of urgency is there by the voters. My concern is, I agree with Mr. Tepe partially. And what I agree with is under the RTA sales tax, moving that money. My problem is if we do a property tax increase and then we try to do a sales tax referendum, it's doomed to failure. So what we have to kind of do is look at the long game here. What's going to work eventually without any guarantees? If we don't get that 2 million this year or in this next year for the property tax increase, but we get a sales tax referendum on the ballot, we have a weak chance of getting it passed. I think it will take 2 ballots before it gets passed. But if we increase our property taxes, and those are the people that are going to vote on the referendum, I think we're kind of killing the opportunity to get the sales tax approved. That's just my own personal opinion.
all right, Mr. Sanchez is online.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Mr. Leonard. That was going to be one of my comments. And I've been saying this for a while. I still think it's almost embarrassing that we haven't gotten to the point where we're ready to put something on the referendum. We've been talking about it long enough. We've been seeing the projections since Joe Onzik was our finance director. It's really the singular solution that we have, because some of these other things that Mr. Tepe has brought up they can only get us so far, and they can only get us so far for so long. And yeah, especially if we increase property taxes, even though it's a small amount, that still has a kind of a larger impact in the psychology of taxpayers. But now if we're talking about increasing the motor fuel tax, they're really not going to be happy with us. And if we ask for a sales tax next year, I don't see how that conversation goes down. So that means we definitely still have to use reserves this year. But how do we make cuts? I guess I missed the first 1 or 2 minutes of this meeting, but I think my understanding of this meeting was that we were going to discuss, what budgets are over and what is causing, or at least, what's a reasonable amount we can bring those budgets down to. And I saw that Kathy gave us the budget report. It's a little detailed. I was out of town this weekend, so I haven't had a chance to analyze the 300 pages. It would be good to see like just a really quick summary of each department, how much they're asking for that's over. And then what portion of that is from, the equity increases and the reasonable increases that we're all in agreement on, and how much of that is over those increases. Because that's, I think, the conversation that we need to have with these departments and offices. If they're coming in asking for more money than we're saying we'd like to give out, well, then that's the conversation we need to have about why. The equity increases we all agree on. Obviously union increases are
Yes, Arthur.
required, but basically, what is our goal here today in this special meeting? Because we're just kind of, like Cliff said, having the same conversation over and over.
Well, thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Actually, Ms. Juby, has done what you were thinking. She has really evaluated each of the departments as to what their contribution from the, tax has been, and she has proposed some, methods of reduction, I guess, for each. But that's, what we're here today is to decide what we're gonna do.
Mr.
And I
President?
think we're gonna decide that before we leave.
Oh, thank you very
Madam
much.
Chair.
Thank you. Go. Is it on? Yes. Just as you're planning, because this is the committee's charge to be able to bring to the executive committee a balanced budget. So as you're forecasting a potential sales tax referendum, the first one that you could put on would be next year in the April election. If that does not propose, it'll fail. Let's go with that. Let's not be optimistic, but realistic. The next one opportunity that you're going to have would be in the primary, and that's now in 26 or in November of 26. So as you're preparing your budgets, I would suggest that you take a look at a 2-year forecasting, because there's not going to be any relief. And I'd say until the minimum maybe August of 26 or of 27. So you've got 2 years worth of budget forecasting this committee should be in charge of. So whatever that's going to look like, yes, just keep that in mind. This is not a panacea. You're not going to get cash right away.
So Dale, what are you asking of us today right now?
I'm saying we're either going to go back to each department and ask them to reduce their asking budget by the amount we tell them to, or we forget about it and just say, hey, we're going to take what they propose as their budgets right now, and we're going to bite the bullet, and we're going to take $29 million out of reserve.
Yeah, sir, just just to say we're taking the money out of reserves is just irresponsible. I mean,
But then,
we owe more. Ms.
Hello.
Juby, I would be
Hi.
leaning toward your presentation or your proposal to move forward.
But I'm not saying, I'm sorry, I'm not saying that that's necessarily the amount they're going to be able to
I
find.
understand. I understand.
But they're listening on the phone, and I don't want the sheriff pissed off at me right now.
No, I mean, I don't want them unfunded, so.
No, I don't either. But we need to know that that we've done what they've asked us to do. The taxpayers have asked us, find cuts before you ask us for more money. We need to do that.
Mr. Leonard,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that we do a blend of things. Number one, I think we do have to move the RTA sales tax. That's $6.3 million. Number two, I think we need to look at starting a program to present a sales tax revenue to the people of the county. I think that's very important. And number three, we have to make some cuts on expenses. I mean, I think if we can't do anything else today, what we should agree upon is that we do at least those three things. Take the RTA sales tax, start a committee or some group to start educating and forming a sales tax referendum group. I know the Forest Preserve did that, and they've done a wonderful job in educating, and that's why it always gets passed.
We don't need to reinvent the wheel. The
Right.
model is there.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to do that. And then the other thing, I do think we're going to have to cut expenses right now. And then finally, the last thing, maybe we can't cut the expenses totally to balance the budget. So maybe we need 10 million in reserves this year and next year for 25 and 26. And then hopefully if the sales tax referendum is passed the second time around, then we'll have monies to handle things down the road. But I don't agree with taking much money from reserves to balance this budget, but maybe as a midpoint, we use a little bit of that, maybe $10 million. We cut expenses 10 million and we take the RTA sales tax. Those three areas right there will get us pretty close to a balanced budget.
But Mr. Chair, let me add on to what Mr. Leonard is suggesting and maybe disagree with him in one area.
Mr. Chairman.
I brought my screen up here to show the 29 million in reserves, roughly 2 million for PTEL and the 6.3 million for RTA. Okay, but so if we did not come up with some kind of a draconian cut, we would just be really in the hole if we didn't address these other two areas. There are at the end of this year, it's anticipated, and I just got the figure from Kathy. So at the end of this year, we're anticipated to have 76.7 million in reserves. So if we use 10 million this year, okay, and 10 million next year, and if we also allocate some funds associated to building funds, we can get our reserves down to a manageable level, but we can't handle, 29 million this year and 40 million next year. We don't have enough reserves to keep us in there. So yes, we need to do something with the reallocation on the minimum basis. The biggest number there that can affect things is to reallocate the RTA tax.
Mr. Chairman, Shep Rowe, State's Attorney. To the point about forming a committee, I would just wanted to remind everybody, one, practically, yes, there needs to be a committee, but we as a board have to be very careful about what our involvement is. Again, the statutes of the state basically prohibit anything that urges a vote for or against, although the informational opportunity is there, and obviously that is a way to get the case in front of the public. And as I think
Ken, politely, I think that everything being discussed today is in the spirit of transparency and creating those educational talking points. And again, I stress, we have done this very successfully wearing our other hat as Forest Preserve Commissioners, and reinventing that wheel wouldn't be so tough to do, but we truly just don't have those talking points. And I believe as this conversation has gone on, what we're hearing is not 29,000, but take a little bit this year, a little bit the following year, while you're reducing some of the expenses in an educational format to bring to the people to say, this is what we're at, it's your choice.
I just, I'm getting a little out of my lane here, but you're not reinventing the wheel, but the cart with the wheel is in a different field than the forest preserve.
Definitely.
Same cart, different field.
Yeah, I think we're getting beyond.
Yeah.
I think we all feel that sales tax is the way to go in the future, but I think today our problem is, what are we gonna do about the 29 million? I think the RTA movement, if that's gonna bring in 6.3 million, that's fine. Now we're down to
22 million.
22 million. Okay, Ms. Juby.
I was under the impression that if we did the RTA reallocation, we also had to do a gas tax.
That's not my understanding. They're
So we're
actually
just going
separate. So
to,
the suggestion was to do the fuel tax to replenish.
right, so
KDOT.
we would be asking the Department of Transportation to lose $6.3 million that potentially is leveraged with matching funds. So I'm not really a fan of that until we know more of that. I think I'm also not a fan of the dollar amount and percentages that I threw out there. I'm not a fan of that. I just want to go on record as saying that. But I think that if we decide that this is too big of a task for us to do this year without the alternates in the future, then we as a group should decide how much of reserves we would like to spend and then figure out the percentage or the dollars then that we would have to go ask people to remove from their budget. And then continue in the same way. If they can't remove it from their budget, then that's their committee's department to defend them in the presentation of the budget. We also made a conscious effort to pay down our reserves. These are reserves over best practices of 90 days operating funds. And our purpose is to spend them down. However, once we hit the zero of them, we have no way to get any more out of there because we can't take it out of our 90-day reserve. So with that said, don't talk about spending it down like it's a bad thing because we all agreed it was a good thing to spend it down. But just be aware when that balance hits zero, we have no options. So gradually bringing it down, maybe bringing it down over 3 or 4 years is fine with me, as long as we're looking at ways to bolster up the income that's coming in. But
Responsible with our.
well, of course, we have to be responsible about it. And I think when we look at these expenses that we're going to be asking, we're not telling them how to get rid of their dollars. We're just telling them this is the dollars. We have to understand that everything has gone up. We hear our taxpayers say that our budgets are messed up because everything's more expensive. Well, it works on the county side too. Everything's more expensive. And so we don't have to like it, but we need to figure that needs to be padded into that budget as well. We can't ask them to make cuts that they can't make. We can't ask them to buy a pencil for 10 cents when a pencil's $10. So, but we, to what Mr. Sir just said, we need to decide today what we're going to be asking everybody to do.
Leonard?
One other thought, this is not a popular suggestion by any means, but we may want to consider also not reallocating for 25 the 4 million to the capital fund. That's another 4 million there, the 6.3 on the RTA, 10 million in reserves, and then the rest in cuts, I think is a reasonable solution to what we're dealing with for the next 2 years.
So you're suggesting nothing for capital improvements. That takes it down to 18 million. And then you're saying 10 million from our reserves?
Yes.
And
Mr. Chair.
we have 8 million that we want to present to.
If following Mr. Leonard's numbers associated with that, we're talking about taking probably $15 million out of reserves if we follow with that logic this year. So, and that's still giving us these draconian cuts that I've got on this list. And this is the key thing we've got to deal with. We've got to deal with these cuts, whatever they end up being.
Well,
I think I thought mine were pretty drastic. I think Ms. Juby's are even more drastic. It just shows that several of us are taking a look at the fact that we've got to do something in order to change this around because we just don't have the money. If I was running this as a business, okay, to have my sales manager come in and say, we got this great idea that's going to increase sales, but it's going to be a year and a half from now. So let's continue the way we're going now, just, until we get that increase in sales. That's just a little bit, in my mind, a little bit of a dream that I just can't wake up from that and say that was not a dream, that was a nightmare.
That's where they invented chapter 11.
Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, I think we do have to come to some conclusion and decisions today on this meeting. And my suggestion is that we initially, and we may have to change it, but initially, we take the RTA sales tax of 6.3 million. We take 10 million out of reserves. We take the capital fund allocation for 25 out, that's another 4 million. And then we're looking at about approximately 10 million in cuts, and it could be more than that. But I think at least initially, we have to kind of set a starting base. And I think we as a committee need to agree on what that starting base is going to be and where we're going to go from here.
Mr. Chair,
Excuse me.
sorry, so could we do, because I'm not all on board on this RTA thing, could we like take 15 million as our base where we want to see cuts of 15 million? Can we start with that instead of 10 million? Because I'm a little uncomfortable. Again, we're borrowing off of something we don't know is going to happen. So if we take the 4 million out of, yeah, so if we just look at maybe 12 to 15 million dollars of cuts to see if it can be done. And it, like, I'm expecting it's not going to be, but could we agree on that figure maybe?
Well, I don't know. You're saying you're not agreeable with the RTA.
I'm saying I need more information about that, and I can't make a decision today to send forward.
What information?
I need to know how that's going to affect the Department of Transportation.
Not well, but none of the departments are going to be affected well with these cuts.
15 million.
Right, but if we're losing matching funds because of it, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face. And I don't have enough information in front of me today to make that decision. I'm not saying I won't when it's presented to me, but today I don't have it, so I would prefer not to have that included.
I mean, that's a big chunk of it, but
But, you know, I think we're,
Included make intention on.
once again, these are just intentions. These are not, hard and fast rules that we're going to follow. But I think we as a committee today have to come up with a game plan. And whether we all agree on it, I mean, the bottom line is with the RTA sales tax, that's 6.3 million. I guess the question is, would we rather have transportation suffer a little bit, or would we rather cut payroll by another 6 million?
yeah.
Not a decision I can make today because I don't, that's
And
all
let's-
hypothetical.
And we're not.
Right.
Well, I get a feeling that
Which child?
that we're consensus is more approving taking the RTA,
Which child?
and that be against what you say, Ms. Juby. But I feel that consensus is that way.
To take the RTA? I don't agree with that.
I know,
But
that's right,
if
but-
the majority does, yes.
I
But
think consensus is the other.
I would rather do bird in the hand, things that we know we have in front of us.
Getting rid of people.
We don't know
Mr.
that, but
Chairman Sanchez here.
it's just to get the conversation started.
And that's all we're doing now.
Right.
We're not, nothing's in
Right.
concrete.
So if we come up with the 7.5 million saves a bunch of people, maybe that will change my mind on swapping over the RTA sales tax. But I need more information. That's all.
Okay.
All right, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I don't know, this conversation still seems to not be so focused. I thought that the whole purpose of this meeting was to get us to a point where we would be able to recommend a balanced budget at our next regular meeting. Maybe that's not the plan anymore.
No.
I keep coming back to the concept of, well, we have budgets that are asking more than we wanted them to, compared to last year. And some of that increase, as Ms. Hopkinson has said, is from unions, union contracts, and then some of it is from the equity increases. The rest of the increases that we're seeing, the overages, are not from those two piles. So what I was hoping we were going to have the information in front of us today to discuss is how much in total and from each department are they asking over those equity increases, the union increases, and over the budget previous year. So I don't know if there's a way we can get those numbers, because to me, that seems to be the number we want to look at first. And then go to those departments and offices and say, what can we do? We want to look at a cut of this much. Is that going to be realistic? We have offices that will push back very hard, and not just in words, if we cut too much. And we need to know how close to the bone we can get. And I'm not hearing that in this conversation either, because we don't have those numbers. So how do we get those numbers
We're not at that point yet, I don't think. I think we're working on it, but we're not there. Ms. Hopkinson has something to say.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the salary increases that are built into the budget, the salary increases that were built into the budget were based on employees who are active employees as of the last couple of months. Obviously, that changes every day. And vacant positions. That we've had that whole discussion over the last several months. But there is no department that built in additional salary increases other than collective bargaining units, contractual amounts, and the 2.5%. If there's any additional dollars in a salary line item, it's because of vacant positions that have been built into the budget.
Miss,
Oh, hold on, Mr. Chair, if I may finish my thought.
oh, okay.
I'm just kind of curious, like, what is the real amount that we could reduce these budgets to? Because I feel like even what we're looking at on the screen here and talking about today is not realistic. And I'm just curious how we're going to really have these conversations, because again, some of these elected officials with really large budgets that are going to have really big cuts based on what we're talking about, they're going to push back, and it's going to make this whole process much more complicated. So I guess I would like to know, what are we going to be proposing at our next finance meeting as a balanced budget that goes forward to the rest of the board? How are we going to get there? I'm not hearing the exact specific. I'm just hearing everybody's got their own ideas.
I
But
don't think we're at the point yet where we can say, take this or take that. I think we're still discussing it. Ms. Bates, had your hand up.
Yes, I do. Thank you, sir. My question is, when we talk about not putting more money into the capital fund, my recollection is that does that mean that we would be reducing our money for deferred maintenance? Does the maintenance of our buildings come out of the capital fund?
Yes.
Yes, because I believe when we had the discussion about building a new, oh, thank you, Ms. Hopkinson. Go ahead.
There's building maintenance costs, both in the general fund and in the capital projects fund. The capital projects fund has the larger projects, if you will, of everything related to buildings management and buildings maintenance.
Because I believe Mr. Fonstock created a plan which was about $40 million over the next 5 years or so. So he had spread that out responsibly. And if we take away from that, does that mean our roof is going to start to leak or whatever?
I would have Roger answer those detailed questions on the facilities.
Okay,
Sure.
well, but we'd be taking, oh, is he here? Oh, okay.
Well, none of these suggestions are perfect. I think that there's going to be some downside on everything we do. So it's not like we're saying that we have to select something. So that's what we're working on at this point in time. And I
well,
think
Mr. Chairman, this is Sanchez again. Are we trying to figure out a specific amount that we want to cut from the budget to use less reserves? Like, what are we trying to figure out here today?
well,
Yeah, I asked
think
that a
that's-
half an hour ago.
I think that's what we've been doing. That's,
I haven't heard
that's
that.
what we discussed. We started out with not too long ago, the number of 35 million, and now we're down to a point of something like 18? No, we're down to
Well, it's 29 million because
oh, no,
after
I'm
ARPA
talking
money.
after we're saying we're down to we were down to 22 million, and we take the RTA out.
Yeah,
whatever,
but
so-
we would all have to agree on the RTA, which I definitely don't. I won't vote for an RTA switch unless we're doing a motor fuel to recompense KDOT. But I don't want to do motor fuel because that's going to shoot ourselves in the foot for sales tax. So I'm just, how are we drawing consensus here? I'm just so confused by this meeting and the way that we're going about this. It's not focused. It's very diffuse. And I'm just not seeing the tight leadership that we need here.
What do you suggest, Mr. Sanchez?
I think, the idea that we're not going to use as much reserves as close to 29 million is unrealistic. I think that we're going to have to use a big chunk of reserves, but how much can we cut from these departments' budgets? That's the main question we have to figure out. How much can we at least attempt to cut from these budgets? We need to get a figure together, and then we have to have that conversation with these
All right.
offices and departments, because again, suggesting just outright, even what Vern gave here, it doesn't include all the budget, all the offices and the departments. There's so many that are, IT's not even on there. Building management isn't even on there. I mean, we have these, half-formed ideas that we're presenting here. I want to know how much over from each office and department is there. What are they asking over last year? What that's after, the salary increases that we're in agreement with. And Kathy, it sounds like she's saying there might not be much. All right, well then how are we going to make these cuts from these? How are we going to ask these departments to do this when we're telling them, yes, let's give them the equity increases. We have to do the union increases. How are we going to ask them to cut where else? Because we don't get into the details of their budget. I think it's useful for the conversation to have so we understand why they're asking for what they're asking for. But yeah, we need some kind of figures to work with to at least start that conversation, because otherwise we're going to have to use just full reserves unless we can get the votes for, Vern's ideas of the increases.
All right, we have numbers. Mr. Surges.
Yeah, Jared, I'm trying to look at this entire situation, not from the perspective of this is what I'm asking you to cut from your budget, but moreover from the perspective of this is all we have to spend. So this is what will allow you or allocate, or this is what's appropriate. There's a finite amount of money. And saying there's 29 million that we're going to take out of the savings account, you can wrap that any way you want to, but I'm not suggesting, this is where I want you to make the cuts. I'm suggesting this is all the money we have to spend. Yeah, you know what, you can come with any proposal you'd like to for our consideration, but this is kind of where we're at.
Right. All right, I have some numbers here that Ms. Juby has come up with. We talked about what do we want to try to cut from the proposed budget. And we've come up with a number of 15 million. Let's say we want to cut 15 million out of the proposed budget, okay? And we have it boiled down to different departments and what their percentage is of our tax revenue, okay? And we come up with this to get to this 15,000.
Million.
Pardon?
Million.
15 million, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Few more
I'm trying to make the problem so much less than what it is, I guess. But we're saying court services, which uses 7%, would be asked to reduce $1,050,000. IT again uses 7%. They would be asked to reduce $1,050,000. Building management, which uses 11%, would be asked to reduce $1,650,000. State's attorney, which uses 9%, would be asked to reduce their budget by $1,350,000. And the sheriff, who uses 36% of the budget, would be asked to reduce the budget by $5,400,000. Now, there's numbers, Jarrett. That's a beginning thing. That's a starting point. Comment?
So is that saying that we're trying to fill 15 million in cuts or find
That's the
15
number
million cuts?
that's the number I was working with.
All right, so then we would still use 14 million in reserves, 15 million in cuts if we can find 15 million in cuts.
True. Mr. Leonard?
No, I think,
Go ahead, Cliff.
no, unless my math's off,
We're down to-
Jarrett's removing the KDOT component from that. And Bill, you're suggesting the KDOT be in there. I don't want to, convolute this, decide, call a vote, do a straw poll, whatever we need to do, but let's move that out of committee with a clear direction that that's what you're going to do or not concerning the KDOT proposal. I mean, that's $6.5 million.
No, that's part of our decision today.
Yeah, so let's, if you'd like to do that right now, let's take that portion and grapple that so we can keep moving this
All right.
forward.
All right,
Mr. Chair,
but we can't,
we still don't have enough information for that. What the suggestion was, I listened to what everyone said about how we're gonna phase in this, how we, knowing that we have to spend down these reserves. So we plan to find $15 million worth of cuts. And then, yes, fund with the reserves, because that was our intention on the 2025 budget. We all had that conversation. So, and then if we can't find the $15 million of cuts, we're gonna obviously have to take out more. But that's another conversation of the revenue side. We can't do the revenue side right now. We have to do the budget side, because the revenue side has a lot of moving parts. So I'm suggesting that we take the baseline of 15 million with the expectation that we will be funding with reserves for the 2025 budget, which is what everyone talked about. We talked about it for the 2024 budget. So just to get us moving, so we're not stuck doing nothing, having the same conversations over again.
I want to come back next week and do the same. Yeah.
We may need to.
oh,
Yes, we may, but we won't know that until they look at these numbers and say, hey, this is why we can't do that.
Ms. Pepe,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Ms. Juby has made some good points, but in expanding that, I think we're discussing things that are in some cases a little bit raw, okay? We all have reactions to it because this is the first time we're really thinking about these kinds of situations. I'd like to suggest that we consider having another special meeting in about 2 weeks. And perhaps Ms. Juby and I work together with Ms. Hopkinson to come up with some suggestions that we will have on the table, and we'll get that out to everybody in advance of that next special meeting. I
kind of would like.
and
to
I only
do that
suggested
today,
2
though.
people because of the
I would like to just
limitations associated with the
say,
Open Meetings Act.
I kind of would like us to come up with an idea today, because in 2 weeks, we're gonna have to come back when all of these departments come and say, this is why we can't do it. I'd rather use the 2-week meeting for us to have a different set of facts in front of us.
How do you have that conversation today if you don't have those facts?
No, I'm saying that we throw out the 15 million cuts today, and in 2 weeks, we get the feedback.
That's the guideline and move it.
That's the guideline. And then we have another special meeting that says why this won't work, or why it will work, or why it won't work with some, but will work with others. And then we have that conversation. And then if we need to go back, I'm happy to work offline, but I think that
I'm okay with that.
we just
concept.
need more data.
If you're looking for consensus, I'm okay with that. concept.
15 million
Yep.
cut, 15 million reserve, or 14 million reserve.
This 15 million cut. Let's not talk about the reserve right now. Let's just try to hone in on trying to identify if we can cut money.
You know, I think that's an easy number to come up with, but quite frankly, I don't think it's realistic. We are not going to find 15 million in cuts in the budget
Of course
in
not.
the departments. So why present something that isn't even reasonable? I mean, I think even 10 million is going to be difficult. You know, but once again, I understand your point. We have to have some direction right now. And my direction would be 10 million in cuts, 10 million in reserves, and 10 million in RTA and capital fund reduction. So, you know, the 6.3 million in RTA, the 4 million in the capital, that's 10, and then 10 for cuts in departments, and then 10 in reserve. Once again, it's just a starting point, but I think if we go at 15 million, you know, I don't mean to be speaking for any of the department heads, but if I'm in one of the larger departments and I'm told you've got to cut $5 million, it's not going to happen.
the total of what I requested was 10,500,000 of the 15 million. So, you know, we're talking about what we included in this was 10 million.
And even if we have to increase the reserves to 15 million this year, I'm okay with that. But I still think what we have to really come to a decision on, do we want to cut expenses for capital or RTA sales tax, or do we want to cut employees? And that's really what the question is.
I agree with that, but I think that we have to be fair about what we ask for. And what you're asking for is contingent on things that we haven't agreed on as a board up until this point. Now, I've only been on the board for 2 years, but we have not agreed on those things you're asking for. So if we just throw out a figure and find out how far we come to it, it's like throwing spaghetti on the wall. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't stick, it doesn't stick. It just gives us more data points to have another conversation, because we know it's not going to be solved today. We know it's probably not going to be solved in 2 weeks, but we'll have more information in 2 weeks about why this was a bad or a good idea that we threw out today. I just don't want to have this contingent on things that we have not agreed on as a full board. We just didn't. We didn't have an agreement about RTA sales tax. We didn't have an agreement on a referendum. We didn't have an agreement on any of those things. So let's just take all those things that we don't have an agreement on and stick to, can we find $15 million worth of cuts? If the answer is no, then we know. How much can we find? Oh, we found 2 million. Okay, now we have to sit back down and throw our new set of facts out. I just want to get the conversation started. I'm not saying that we're going to find 5 million out of the sheriff's office. He might find 1 million. He might find 2. I don't know what he's going to find. And I'm not asking him to make it in personnel, because it's not up to me what he chooses.
Well, 80% is personnel and benefits. So the reality
Exactly.
is whatever the cut is, 80% of it's going to come from that area. So fine, if you want to present 15 million as a cut and 15 million or 14 million in reserve, fine. I just think if we were a little bit more realistic with the departments, and had 10 million, 10 million, 10 million for the 3 areas, it might be a little bit more plausible. I know in negotiations, when someone throws out a crazy number, a lot of times people say, I'm not going to counter. That happens. So if you're not going to be realistic or reasonable initially, people aren't going to want to play the
Well,
game.
that's why I thought 15 million was reasonable, because we're looking at a $29 million deficit spending. So half of it, because I'm not on board for the RTA. I'm just not on board there. So I cannot make a decision contingent on me voting yes on that, because we may go through all of this and not have the votes for it. So I don't think this is throwing pie in the sky, being unreasonable. I think this is starting the conversation. Do I think they're going to find this percentage of money? No, I don't. But I need to know that they tried.
All right,
Mr. Chair Sanchez.
Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you. Listening to your conversation, I truly appreciate it. I feel like we've been going off of a credit card for a very long period of time in the last 4 years, and borrowing money off of our reserves, which all could be put into capital, as we know. But just tactically, what percentage are we looking at? I'm looking at for each of the budget cuts, whether it's 10 million or 15 million, whatever this committee decides. The slide that says general share of department share of general revenue fund, it's on the bottom on side. Some of you may be right side. Is that the percentage that we're looking at for each department? If that would be the percentage of either the 10 million or the 15, because is that what we're
Yes.
be looking at then? Because this does not do that.
It's the
No.
chart that Kathy gave us.
Yeah,
Kathy
so,
gave us a
That was
chart.
that's not a realistic one.
so,
As realistic.
so if whatever number this committee decides, if Kathleen then can put together what the actual number is of budget cuts. So if you have 1% or 0.5%, that's how much money we'd be asking that department to reduce it by.
We were only asking for departments that took over 6% of the budget.
So is that what we're just looking at? So that would be a minimum of.
Right, so court services takes 7% of the general fund.
So basically, public safety,
So
judicial public safety is what we're
court
looking at.
services, 7%, IT, 7%, building management, 11%, state's attorney, 9%, sheriff, 36%, just as a starting point. It doesn't necessarily mean that's where it's going to end up.
And those just for my own clarity, so those departments are going to be responsible for either the 10 million or the $15 million, $10 million worth of budget cuts. All right.
Well, we've had a lot of oh, Mr. Jarrett, did you want to
Yeah.
speak?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I don't follow the logic in just looking at the budgets that are over like a 5% of the total. I would, 5% of $5 isn't the same as 5% of 200 million. So I would want to see all departments and all offices listed, knowing that some might not be able to cut at all, unless they just don't buy staples for the year or something like that. But I would at least like to see that number instead of just saying, oh, well, your budget's big enough, so all you guys, you're all the ones that are going to bear the cuts. And I think as we're talking about this, it's important to reiterate what Ms. Juby said, that this is just a concept that we approach everyone with. We can't expect them to find the exact amount of cuts that we're looking for, because again, like Bill had said, 80% is personnel. Who are we going to lay off? What jobs are not needing to be done that bad this year? I mean, I think we're going to find ourselves in some pretty murky waters here. So I just would hope that anybody listening in these offices understands that, we're just trying to explore ideas here. We're not going to come to them with ultimatums. But I would at least like to see that figure. If we're going to just use an arbitrary number, I guess 15 million, 10 million is probably more reasonable, but something like that. But I don't want to like leave anybody out of that, and put more potential burden on other departments and offices.
Mr. Leonard,
No, I think I'm done speaking for right now. Thank you.
all right. Yeah, we're at the point where we need
Bates,
to.
please. Bates, please.
Ms.
Bates.
Bates, yes.
So I know that we mentioned the P-TEL increase, the CPI increase. And people say, well, that's only $2 million, but actually that's a lot of money. So I'd like to just say what can happen there. Let's not just forget about it.
Thank you. I think it's a point we need to come up with a motion as to what we're going to present. I think we've discussed enough. I think we've talked about, I think there's no reason why we can't go with our request for $10 million in cuts against those users of our major users of the budget.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Tepe.
I don't think we're at that point. Okay. I'm not willing to agree to the $10 million. I agree with Ms. Juby that I have a lot of open questions. My point in preparing this presentation was to start this discussion, and I think it's gone the way that unfortunately it needed to go. I again would like to suggest that we come back in 2 weeks and have another special meeting. We're going to get input from a lot of people that are listening into this meeting. And, I'm not ready to pass on any kind of recommendations, either to the Finance Committee for its regular meeting or to the board at this point. So I'm not there yet.
All right. Can't we make a decision as to how much we're gonna take out of reserves?
I'm not ready to do that. We still aren't, we're certainly not in agreement on should we do the P-TEL. We're certainly not in agreement in relationship to the RTA tax. And I don't think we're in agreement on a number to cut the budgets. And we're not in agreement in a way to give the numbers to those departments that we want to cut. All of that's up in the air, and I think it's something that we need to come up with in more depth. Sorry.
Mr. Chair Bates, please.
Yes, Ms. Bates.
My feeling about this right now, my thoughts are that there's policy and there's numbers. And that whether the numbers are 10 million or 15 million or 5 million on the cuts, we can come to an agreement on what should the policy be. Meaning, are we determined to cut something from our budget? Then that would be a policy decision without naming specific numbers that, yes, we are ready to say that is our policy. And I'd like to see this meeting at least come to that agreement. To feel like we've moved forward somewhat.
Madam Chair.
I feel like I'm the one who's giving out the rules. We've got October, and I'd like to ensure that this finance committee then brings it to the board executive committee, who then approves your proposed budget and then move it on to the board. We have to have a budget presentation finalized by October. It has to be passed in November. So you're on a deadline. So whatever decisions you make, please be thoughtful and be efficient. It's time to act.
Mr. Jarrett. Mr. Sanchez.
I didn't have my hand up. Sorry, Mr. Chair, I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, well, your comments about this being messy and 90 minutes to get barely anywhere is frustrating. Yes, it is. But do you have a motion you'd like to make for the committee to look at?
Well, I guess it really just comes back to us having to find some number. And if we're not going to at least have the conversation today about what we agree on the revenue side, as far as going after PTEL, RTA, all those things we were discussing earlier, then all we're left with is just an arbitrary number to try and go after for cuts, and then come back at another meeting and discuss it further.
All right. I think there's a feeling there's more information that's necessary. Roth.
Roth here. We're talking about a lot, and some people say, well, I don't want to discuss this or that. You know, years ago, I learned in my career, if you have an issue, you better come with the solution. So if you're, like, example, disagree with the RTA, what are you offering as an alternative? The other, last week, Ms. Juby brought up that we should be compared against actual. And would that change our number on the budget deficit if we went off of actuals instead of off of last year's 24 budget? That makes it, if we make that policy, then that's where it is. And that, I think, is a better practice.
I think one of the things was, obviously a lot happened between 23 and 24 in terms of expenses. So while I always look at actual, it's going to be hard in this case to be precise about that, because we would need the actual of what's happening in 2024. And the way a budget cycle works is it's impossible. You can't create a budget off of that. So when Kathleen said we would be near that amount, the proposed budget, we kind of just have to take that at face value.
But we're going to have 7 months of actual for 24,
I understand that.
which is more than half.
I'm
So
just saying that.
would that help us get to our number? Because like you said last week, it's a more accurate number, what we should be.
It's a much more accurate number, but how is?
And when I did budget systems, we would do that and then adjust as we
Right.
went each month.
So, I mean, my 15 million seems kind of random. It's kind of really not.
Right.
But we have to start somewhere. We can't just not keep doing things.
Right. We can't postpone this. I mean, November is coming really quick and we got to vote. I don't want to be like we were last year, where we're voting the week of Thanksgiving
No.
to approve a budget. So that's my recommendation.
Well, I think the consensus is we need another meeting. But I'll tell you, I'm gonna ask you right now, what is it you need before this next meeting. Be able to make your decision. So we're not gonna go another 2 weeks after the next meeting and come up with something that's missing.
Are we being required to figure out an alternate revenue source, or are we just looking to?
Why
You want,
why do you want to go on for 2 more weeks? Why do you want to have another meeting?
No, I don't. I want to
Make
throw
it-
this number out and get the ball rolling and then come back.
You don't have enough information to talk about RTA.
No, I don't.
Mr. Tepe doesn't have enough information on something, so whatever that information is, we've got to get that before the next meeting.
But, Mr. Chair, again, the numbers that I came up were meant to create this kind of discussion, okay? I did not go and say, oh, let's take this much money out of any particular budget, other than to say, these are round numbers that need to happen in order to come up with something close to 15 million. I think we need to be more exact. I think we need to go back to each department and say, here's the number that you need to reduce your budget by. That to me is the job of this committee.
Okay.
To me, I suggested that Ms. Juby and I work together only because we didn't have to have a special meeting. We can only have 2 board members involved, but that Ms. Juby and I work together with Ms. Hopkinson and get those numbers to this committee in the next 10 days, and that we would meet in 2 weeks and then come up with our recommendations to the board. So that is again, my suggestion.
I like that suggestion. I think the other thing is, we all need to be able to make a decision by then as to how we feel about the motor fuel tax.
I mean, none of these are.
Well, how do we feel about each one of these things we've discussed so that we can make a decision at that point in time? Are we going to go ahead with this or not go ahead with this?
All of these are horrible decisions, but it's our job to do them. That's why we got elected. So, that would be my suggestion.
Well, we've danced around these decisions for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice to say that, yes, I'm in favor of,
Mr. Berman, point of order. We can set a meeting to go forward, but we can't take final action on anything because we didn't notice anything. We just noticed a discussion. So we can do there's no specific item on the agenda, so we can't take final action.
well, we can, yeah, we have a
And
consensus.
we can set another meeting with no issue.
Consensus, I think. But we've got to come up with a consensus. We've got to come up with agreement. And every time we turn around, if somebody wants more information, then
that would come down to whether or not what you're doing would be considered final action.
No.
And asking for information or throwing out a number is not
No, that's not final
final
action.
action.
But making a motion to do something would be, which we can't do that.
Well, it depends on what the motion is.
it seems,
Not every motion is final action of whatever issue is being addressed.
it seems to me that we're looking at a meeting in 2 weeks. So we will go with that.
So do we have a date on that?
You're gonna want to figure it out later.
Well, I think we, 2 weeks from today would be what, the 13th?
Yeah, we have a county board meeting then.
That's not a good day.
Probably not.
Maybe Monday.
Monday the 12th.
As long as it's in the morning, I can do Monday, the 12th.
Yeah, me too.
Monday the 12th in the morning. We'll shoot for that. All right,
Here at 9 a.m.
9 a.m. with new carpet. Oh, that.
Hey,
Madam Chair.
it's the first.
Apparently, no, I have received a notice that there is asbestos. So once they start doing the remediation, this room will be closed down for a little bit. to do their repair. I don't know how extensive it is, but nonetheless, we'll be meeting. We'll have a meeting. There'll be room for a meeting. But that's got nothing to do with, I'm up here just to comment about the new carpet. What is the charge, sir? So you're going to be meeting in 2 weeks. What is the assignment that you are giving to who to do what? So that decisions can be made.
Well, I think that we want Ms. Kepi and Ms. Juby to discuss what cuts we would present to each department.
To each department or to the, what her recommendation was.
Whatever the recommendation,
Whatever this comes out of there.
whatever comes up from their discussion.
So Vern, that means we would have to get together in the next week.
With Kathy.
Is that
With
okay?
Kathy.
Kathy, is that okay? No, Kathy's going on vacation. She's not.
No, I mean, isn't it with the department heads and the offices? No? Oh, okay.
No, I think that my understanding is that we need to tighten up what our ask is going to be presented at the next special meeting, and then that will then go to the department heads and electeds, correct? Is that,
Mhm.
okay?
You've got the, are you going to be using that chart?
I was using the chart that the Kathy sent us that had the percentage, what each department took of the general fund, not what they took of
Oh, that
of
is-
all the money that comes in, but of just of the general fund.
No, that is, I am looking at the general.
Oh,
fund.
I'm just saying, I'm using the chart that she
It's
sent
the
us.
same.
We, Vern and I will both have that. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
So,
And all departments are going to be on the, Mr. Tepe, you're going to be doing all departments or just the top? The
Let's
top
be
users?
careful about how specific you get because you don't want to create another Open Meetings Act issue by this committee assigning something to a de facto subcommittee.
Leonard,
If people want to work together on it, and bring back with what they have.
we're not directing them.
And I would then also suggest to Ms. Juby's previous point of order that the agenda for your special meeting should at least, even if you don't know what the specific action item is, that there be something listed in a way that would allow you to take a vote and not have to kick the can down again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think too, if Ms. Juby and Mr. Tepe meet and come up with some ideas, I would like everybody on the finance committee to get that information
Yes.
at least 48 hours before the meeting, if not sooner.
Yes.
I think that
Thank you.
anything would be included in the board packet, so we could get it to you as soon as we decide, because it would then be noticed, so everyone else could have it, but we'll get it to you as quick as we,
Time.
yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah.
Got to get our arguing points together.
Of course you do, I understand.
If I may, because I see some committee chairs online as well, all of that should be sent out because it's going to impact them so that there is complete disclosure of what suggested, what the suggestions are and the impact upon a committee.
But it won't go to the committees until we vote on it here in the
Correct.
finance.
That'd be.
That's accurate.
That'd be it.
Absolutely
No
accurate.
need to.
And Mr.
there-
Berman, I am happy to help Ms. Juby and Mr. Tepe at their whim. If they wanted to meet individually, if Vern was up at the north end and said, hey, let's meet, I am more than happy to roll up my sleeves and get into the weeds with this. So
Don't want any of this done in secret.
Well, I think, feel like calling on whoever they may.
making myself available.
So do we have an agreement on the meeting on Monday, August 12th at 9 a.m., either here or in the conference room up on the third floor or down below? I don't care where it
I don't
is,
care
but
where.
Motion to adjourn.
Need a motion to adjourn.
So move.
You need a motion to set the special meeting, or are you just gonna call it?
we're using a consensus right now. Is that all right?
Yeah.
You have consensus, but we need to find a room in an appropriate spot. So motion to adjourn.
Leonard seconds.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Out of here.